Amen.
All right, Matthew chapter 7, and we're finishing this thing out. It's been, I think, 18 weeks by my count that we've kind of just wandered through the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus did it in probably an hour. It took me forever, but he's God and I'm not. So, that's kind of the way it goes, right? But it's been rich for me. I hope it has for you. I've always enjoyed this study, and we come now to the very last section. And I've kind of titled this "Wise or Foolish." It's your life, right? And you get to live it. You can either be foolish with it to your detriment, or you can be wise with it to your profit. And we're going to look at that. And this little message that we're looking at today is both calming in one sense and deeply convicting in another. And so you're familiar with this story. I'm sure we've sung little songs about it. I'm going to read it to you, and then we're just going to kind of wander through it. If I get to the right section. Therefore, we're in verse 24 of chapter 7 of the book of Matthew. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, beat against that home, yet it did not fall, because it hid its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice, well, he's like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. Now, that's what we're going to look at today. I do want to read for us out of the message. We've kind of been doing that here and there just to see a different flavor of it, a little more expanded version of it. So I'm going to read that for you now. It's just out of the message. You can just listen to that. It's more story form. It's really rich. And then we're going to jump into it and just kind of see what we can find. These words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words, words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you're like a smart carpenter who built his house on solid rock. Rain poured down, river flooded, tornado hit, but nothing moved the house. It was fixed to the rock. But if you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you're like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. When Jesus concluded his address, the crowd burst into applause. They had never heard teaching like this. It was apparent that he was living everything he was saying quite contrary to the religious teachers. This was the best teaching they had ever heard. Like how he says that, don't you? Now, here's what I want to do. I just want to kind of remind us of a few things because he's very specific about this. And the story's really short that we're going to tell. What I want to do is just remind us of what were those principles that he taught that he said we should build our life on. Because if we just hear the little story and forget the foundational principles, because there's certain principles in here, he says if you live these things, you'd have no worries about your life collapsing around you. That's pretty powerful stuff. That's why I say it's kind of calming if we think about it. Because, man, can we not find a whole bunch of silliness to worry about right now and to just go crazy about? And we start thinking things, and if we're not careful, we drift into the stupidity of the world, and our mind, we start thinking just like the world because we get it parroted from, if you obsess on the news, you're gonna start thinking like whatever they're telling you. You can't help it. That's why for a lot of us, maybe we should just turn that thing off. I'm not saying bury your head in the sand. I'm just saying quit letting that stuff come in there because it's going to affect how you think. And so as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And this is what Jesus is coming to here. And so I want us to see what those principles were. This isn't it is sort of a rehash, but it's really not. I want you to understand what are the things that he says you and me should put into practice, right? And so hear these before we get to the story. And the first thing he says is we should put into practice a healthy mental game, right? Man, mental health is crazy, right? I mean, it's people are geeking out on that thing, and they're stressed out and worried to death, and they're manic, and then they're depressed, and it's just this whole thing, right? And we're trying to medicate all of that, and Jesus has already given us a somewhat of a what I call beatituding, and he just reminds me that my mental health game, if I want it to be good, I should practice these attitudes, right? And we know what they are, right? That I should be poor in spirit, that I shouldn't try to pretend that I'm something that I'm not, that I should be realistic about who I am, that I know my need for Christ. That's a healthy attitude. That's a mental game that'll change your life when you quit trying to put all the stock in who you are and what you think about yourself. Blessed are those who mourn, right? Who are meek, who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who are merciful, who are pure in heart, who are peacemakers, who bless those who persecute them. That's a mental game. When you get that right, your house is solid. And so it's important that we see that. The second thing is that we understand our purpose. I mean, the whole world wants to tell us about what our purpose is and what our purpose ought to be and all of those things. But yet Jesus was pretty clear. Your purpose, and if this is our foundation, it's a game changer. I'm not, I know we want to talk about my purposes in life, and, we spend all kind of hours doing that. And you may have a specific purpose, right? You may have skills and gifts and all that's specific. But everything that you have falls underneath this one purpose, and it goes back to this foundational thing. You are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world. And if we forget that game, we're going to be in trouble, right? Am I right? I mean, I'm just telling you. This is what he says here. And then he talks about you and me can play the game of mental righteousness and change the rules and make it be whatever it says we are. But true righteousness matters, right? That I understand that hate is not a winning foundation. If I build my life on hate, I have nothing. But there has to be this forgiveness. I have to make it a goal that if there's something between you and me here, I need to fix that before I even think about worrying and worshiping God. I have to do that. That's foundational. I can't ignore this block that I have between you and me and expect that my life is going to be on solid ground. It won't. It's going to be subject to the next whim of somebody who makes me angry. Right? I mean, these are common sense things, and this is what he said. I'm not trying to rehash that. I just want us to understand that. And he said the same thing about lust. Listen, it's not enough just to go, I've never committed adultery with anybody. It's like, where's your mind? Where's your mind day in and day out in this area of lust? Not just sexually, although that was the intent there, but in every area that we lust. If you start letting your lust propel you into doing things, you're never going to have a solid life that you want to have. You just won't. And then he spoke of commitment when he spoke of marriage. Listen, you made a vow. Keep that vow. Be committed to that marriage and that relationship that you're in. Quit holding your eye out, looking for something else that's better that's coming along. That's what's wrong with the world. You can never build a life on that, and you're destroying your kids' lives in the process. Now, don't hate me because I'm just going to be truthful with you there. But divorce always leaves a terrible mark on kids' lives. Can God superimpose himself on that and resurrect that? Yes, absolutely. But still, if I'm going to build a life, I ought to take seriously the commitment that I have toward my marriage. This is Jesus talking. This isn't just me. And then he speaks about your word. It ought to be your bond. Come on, when you start playing games with your speech and you're just playing with others and you don't mean what you're saying, don't expect your life to be well built. It won't be. This is hard-hitting stuff, right? And then we look at the fact of revenge. Man, how much time do we spend on that? Just getting back at people. And even if we just spend energy thinking about what I would say, what I wish I had said, how I should have said it better, right? Listen, breathe, man. That won't build your life. Your life, let it go. They've already forgotten what they did to you. You're only holding on to something that's long been gone. And unless you let it go and go, I'm just going to forgive, it's my gift. You're not forgiving for their sake. You're doing it for your own sake. Or you won't have a house that's built well. Bitter people don't live in good houses. I don't mean physical houses. You get what I'm saying. And then he talks about your enemies. What are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with those people that just hate you? You going to hate them back, or are you just going to forgive them and move on? We don't have time, right? Life's short. I ain't got time to worry about my enemies. I got a lot of them. I was talking with somebody the other night. Last night I was talking with a couple of old friends of ours. And I'm like, man, I've lost so many friends in my life, right? And you go, you can worry about that, or you can go, you know what? I mean, I can't fix that. I just got to forgive them or whatever, and I'm gonna move on. And this is what we're finding in this series that we're looking at here. And then he talks about true religion. It's about quiet generosity and closet praying, right? Man, if you gotta get your name put on some plaque somewhere because you gave something, or it matters to you that you get your name on a building, or somebody applauds you and you get some sort of recognition because you gave, you ain't gonna build a good house. You're not gonna build. Man, hey, we just give, and we don't have to tell anybody about it. And when we pray, I need to be real before God. I don't need to start praying here like you guys are paying attention to what I'm praying. I'm not praying to you. He's saying, listen, you start doing that foolishness, you're not building a good life. You're building a facade, right? You ever been to those facades? Tammy and I got to tour like one of those things when we were in California one year. Hollywood Studios are one of them, and it's a facade. If you've ever seen the movie Psycho, we rode by, and there's this house on the hill. It's a third the size of a normal house. It's made to look small as it sits on that hill. Those of you who grew up like we did and you watched that scary, movie, right? It's just a little house. It's just a facade. All of it's a fake. That's what happens when you start giving so everybody sees, or you start praying so everybody hears. You're building a fake life. And you have a fake little house. I don't want that. Do you want that? I'm just telling you, I don't want that. And then he says, and you know what true freedom is? True freedom is when money's not your master. When you realize that your hope comes from God. And so true freedom is when money doesn't own me, right? I'm not a slave to it. And true freedom happens when I'm not worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow, because tomorrow has enough trouble of its own, and I can't worry about the past because I can't undo it. I'm going to live in the present, just like that sparrow does. And I'm going to assume that when I wake up, God's going to meet my needs. That's not laziness. That's not carelessness. That's just trust in an all-wise, all-living God. That's how you build a good house. This is good, isn't it? I love just reminding myself of this stuff. And then he talks about true judging. Listen, you and I start looking around trying to judge other people, knowing that we got crap in our own life to deal with. Sorry about the word. But that we got that to deal with, and we don't worry about that. We just want to point fingers at you. Now, I'm not building a good house, not for me and my family. That has to go. That kind of just judging in that sense. It's about humility. It's about knowing that everybody's got their own journey, and every journey's hard. And I don't know the motive behind what each and every one of you do. And so if I think that there's a problem, I should analyze my own life first before I even think about saying, hey, can I help you with yours? This is principles that Jesus says if you build your life on these things, you don't have to worry about the storms that come your way. Right? So this is good. And then he says boundaries. Hey, listen, you should have some boundaries. Now the world wants to talk about boundaries, and I think they're all whacked out in their whole boundary thing. But I do know this, that you and me do know that there are certain dogs out there, and there are certain hogs out there, right? That's how Jesus phrases it. That you don't give what is unholy to dogs, and you don't cast your pearl before the hogs. What's he saying? Hey, there's some people that aren't going to listen to you anyway. Quit getting sidetracked trying to preach to somebody that don't want to hear what you got to say. Move on. It's not your fight. But how many times do we make it our fight? Oh, I'm going to keep hitting until they get it right. Stop it. I'm not building a good house if I'm doing that. And then he comes down to the true relationship. It really does come down to two things. Wisdom seeking, right? Ask and you shall knock, and seek and you shall find. Right? Ask and it shall be open. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it'll be open to you. Right? So when I'm trying to figure out life, I should be a wisdom seeker. right? I shouldn't just assume things about people and other things. I should spend my time doing those things of ask and seek and knock, right? That's the goal, wisdom seeking. And then here's the thing, I got one rule I really need to live by, and that's just a golden rule. Well, I should love you like I want to be loved. But life's not that hard, really. It's a golden rule. It's a simple rule. Just how do I want to be loved? Yeah, I like this. Okay, well then go do that to everybody else. Pretty simple. And then he says you're going to come down and you're going to realize the whole world's going in one path and it's leading to destruction. But there is off to the side, unbeknownst to the hurried person, unbeknownst to the one that's not sensitive to what's going on, a little turnstile that takes you up this craggy deal. Choose that road. You want a good life? Choose the path less trapped. Now, that's the message that he's given us this very end game, and I want to take just a brief amount of time and talk about this. Our life is not determined on what we feel, right? Isn't that what he says? Let's read it. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them, right? It's not about both groups heard, right? There's two people here, right? You realize this? There's two people. And they both sat in the same hillside and heard the message of Jesus. And he's saying, I want you to see the contrast. Both of them heard, but one of them acted and one of them didn't. And so our life isn't determined by what we feel so much as what we do with what we heard, right? This is we have to hear right. I can't hear Jesus and go, well, I think what he meant was this. No, I have to hear what he said, and he was pretty specific with what he said. And so I can't just do it based on my feeling. Well, I mean, I know God said you shouldn't divorce, but I feel like the Lord's saying I should leave. Well, then your feeling's broken. Your feeler's broken, right? I mean, can we just be honest about these things? This is what he's saying. It's dependent not on how, but what we do. It's dependent on how and what, not what I feel. It's his truth lived out because his truth matters. Here's what I found. I've tried to reason with God, I don't know how many times in my life, to tell him, I think you messed up here, Lord, on this one section of the scriptures. I think I should do this here. I think I am right to judge here. You know what I've realized? Every time I thought I was smarter than God, I regretted it. Isn't that true? So listen, if he says it, why are we going to argue with this? Why are we going to debate this and try and find 10 other preachers who'll tell us something different because it makes us feel good, tickles our ears, as opposed to just letting God speak to us from his word and go, okay, well, if that's what he said, he's God, he loves me, I'm going to do it. So if he says I should forgive my enemies, and I can think of 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't, I guess I'm going to forgive my enemies. To not is to be one of those problem people. So here's what the text says. Therefore. Now, anytime there's a therefore, what do? We stop and ask what it's there for. Everything I just went through with you a while ago, right? That whole review. Therefore, in light of Jesus saying all of those principles, he says, therefore, he who hears these words of mine, not like your kids hear your words, right? You remember that? I mean, I remember, man, when Jackson, I'd tell Jack, we used to fight about the garbage on Deer Haven because he was old enough to go get those garbage cans that were like 3 miles down the driveway, it felt like, and pull them up and like, hey, Jack, you can get those garbage cans? Yes, sir, I'm going to get them. No, you know what? He said that, but he didn't hear me because it never got brought up. I'd head to work and they're sitting down there, right? And so now he's not, I mean, we all do that. I'm just picking at Jackson because he's here today and he's a grown man and he does all that stuff now. But what I'm saying is we can hear just like that, can't we? Yeah, I know. I'm supposed to love my enemies. Yes, God. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to talk about them all day long, right? We don't hear like a child. That's what he says. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and does what? Acts on them. That's the subtle difference. It's about putting into practice to allow these things to get to the point where they're in my wheelhouse. Until you don't have to keep a check on your finances because generosity is now a part of you. when you can wake up and troubles come and you go, well, I ain't worrying about that today. I got a lot to think about. But I ain't got nothing to worry about because there's a God in heaven who's sovereign and he loves me and he's good. So you know what? I'm going to wait on the Lord, right? This is why this is important. This is about building a good life. And so listen to this. Both built a house and they look like houses, right? I mean, that's what he says. You can look at those people who aren't following the Lord right now and their life may look well put together. Just like yours. And you go, well, what's the difference? Why do they need Christ? Both had dreams, both had plans, both had instructions. Only you and me followed the instructions on the foundation, and they forgot those instructions and bypassed it and thought, I ain't got time for that. I'm just building a structure. So they're building their life, and we're building ours, except we took the time to get the foundation right. He's saying that's the only difference between me and the world. It's about that foundation. Two people, both lives look good. Both heard, but only one practiced the truth. That's the difference. That's how come you can have people that sit in church all day long, years, and you see some that are growing and some that aren't. Why? They both heard the message. Well, because some put it in practice and some didn't. You don't get credit for filling a notebook full of anything. You don't get credit for memorizing anything. You get credit for doing what he says. Sound like, well, I'm preaching. I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to explain to us what we're doing. Now, here's something else. Both of these lives are subjected to the very same storm. The very same. I'm not insulated because I'm a Christian. I'm going to go through the same troubles everybody else does. God didn't say, I'm going to pull you out of that now and you're going to have this little halo life. I put you in a spiritual bubble and nothing but good comes your way. There's a lot of preachers make a lot of money doing that, and they lying to you. Jesus makes it plain right there, doesn't he? In his own story, Jesus says the rains came on both. The winds blew on both. And so we need to understand, look, difficulties and trials are going to come. Faith isn't a preventative to hard times. It's the force used to withstand those trials that come our way. That's what it is. It's the foundation. You've got to get this right. We have to think differently. Both had a foundation. One on the internal truth of God's word and the other on common sense of the world. And that's the difference. Not the structure, not anything else. That one thing, the foundation. If we were to take the time to review the message, and I'm not because we just did, we would know that it's not, everybody intends to build a good life, right? Do you know anybody that just goes, you know what, I want a miserable life. I just hope it's just terrible. Nobody wants that. We all intend to build a good life, but it's not intention that gets us to the destination of a well-lived life. It's direction. I have to take my cues from the Savior, and I have to walk that way. And when we first started youth ministry, we talked about right thinking and stinking thinking, right? And that's the problem. If we don't build our life on right thinking, everything else is sinking sand. Isn't there a hymn about that? All other ground is sinking sand, man. So listen, why are you listening to the talking heads on TV? And why are you listening to all these politicians who are they're the biggest fools around. All of them. Well, why are we, look, how about we look at the one true king, the one who does rule over all. Let's just listen to him and do what he says and ignore everybody else. Life's going to be a whole lot better. So you and I have a choice. We just do this upside down living. That's what he's talking about. Let's build our foundation on what he said. And then my life is going to be well lived. It doesn't matter the way that you see it that way or not. It's what God says it is. It may not look well lived to you because I don't live in the big house like you live in. Yeah, but I was generous with my money and I used it wisely, right? That's the message in a rather concentrated sort of time. I'm glad you guys came and hung out. Well, we're going to eat. We're going to have a good time. We're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper. It's a great day. And I got a song for us to kind of lead our way out of here. And we're gonna let Michael come up and lead us in some Holy Communion and just enjoy the day.